Well, good evening, everybody. If you're staying up late again, it's again another late night here in Washington, D.C., as we've gone through now our eighth day on the impeachment hearing of the President of the United States. Just wrapped up about 45 minutes ago, somewhere through there, and trying to be able to collect my thoughts at the end of the day back over in my office from the Capitol area. We did 10 hours total, a little over 8 hours actually meeting time, but 10 hours total. We started at 1 o'clock, finished just a little bit after 11 o'clock tonight. We did 93 total questions in that 10 hours total of time. We had questions that alternated back and forth. If you were watching it all, there'd be a question from a Republican, question from a Democrat, question from a Republican, and they could ask either the House managers or they could ask the White House counsel. So the person who's actually asking the question could choose where they want to go, or they could choose to split it and say half the time goes to one, half the time goes to the other one. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is presiding over the whole thing, was kind of also timekeeper today. So he would, the way that the questions work, if you haven't seen it yet, still as members of the Senate, we can't speak there. So we have to physically write out our question. Then we stand when it's a time for a Republican or Democrat to be recognized. We stand up, Chief Justice recognizes us. We say we have a question that we want to bring to the desk, and it goes to either the House managers or to the White House. A page will literally come pick it up from our desk, take it up to the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice reads the question, and then there's 5 minutes of time for either the House managers or the White House counsel to be able to answer it, unless it's split, and then each of them get 2.5 minutes of time, and that alternates back and forth on it. So that's kind of the process. There's 3 questions that actually joined in today that I was a part of the 93 questions that are there. I'll have other questions for tomorrow as well. But there's several members that have actually joined together on questions. We had similar questions. And so as we talk to each other behind the scenes or in break times in the cloakroom, as we're talking about the different issues that we still want to be able to get an answer to, we'll join together and say, okay, let's all go together to be able to ask this one particular question. And one member will be the point person to actually have it delivered down to the Chief Justice, but the rest of us are on board. So it's kind of been the process as we've gone through the course of the day today. Today's a really pivotal day. Because we've done not only the opening debate on it, which was 13 hours long, and then did 21 hours for the House, scattered over 3 days for them to make their case, then 3 days for the White House to be able to respond to that and to be able to make their case. We have a full day of questioning today. That was 10 hours. We have another full day tomorrow. That'll be probably 10 hours as well. And then we move on to the next segment from there. At this point, as I go through this, I've not seen anything from all of the 8 days that we've gone through that would warrant removal of office for the President of the United States. I know there's some disagreement on some different things in the conversation, but as I look at all the facts on the case, I don't see anything that warrants removal of a president from office that rises that level. Second thing, I also have plenty of my questions answered at this point, and so I don't see a need to have additional witnesses. Now, again, there are some folks that are looking for additional witnesses to continue the case to move in other areas, but to answer the 2 questions that the House representatives had sent us, we have it, especially today after the additional revelations have come out with John Bolton and some additional video and interviews that he has done that he did in August of last year, talking specifically about the call with the president on the 25th of July and some of the details, and other interviews that he has during that same time period and other documents where he had other conversations with people and didn't express a concern. In fact, he called the call, July the 25th call that there's so much angst about right now, warm and cordial, actually, as they call. So that's, we don't know what all is in his book at this point, but we do know other public statements that he has made now and other things that he has declared out on this. And so I've removed a lot of that issue. I'd still like to be able to see his manuscript. I think it'd be a good thing to be able to have. We have since learned in the last few hours as well that the 23rd of January, the NSC, the National Security Council, their lawyers had written out to John Bolton's attorney and said, hey, there's some classified material in this manuscript that sent us. In fact, there's even some top secret level materials that you put in this manuscript, so this can't be released out. That was done the 23rd of January. The 26th of January is when the story came out in the New York Times that something had been leaked to them. So what it appears is someone in the National Security Council wanted to be able to get information out, even though they knew this was classified and wasn't going to get out, and they were trying to find a way to be able to push that out. So we don't know all the background of the story. We do know his public statements. We know a lot more now than what we knew just 2 days ago about John Bolton and some of his comments about this. In the past several days, I've tried to be really clear to be able to kind of walk through the order of what happened. Today with 10 hours of questions, and the questions had no particular order in them. in no particular topic. So we were all over the map all day long with different topics. Lots of conversation on constitutional issues, about what does the Constitution say about a 2/3 majority? What's the Constitution say about the role of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? What's the Constitution say about executive authority and privilege and such? And so we were back and forth on a lot of those issues. We went through the day. There were questions about specific facts. This fact was in dispute. Is it still in dispute? And to be able to talk through some of those things. So it was just a really interesting day to be able to walk through. There were some conversations about Burisma and about Hunter Biden that came up at different points to say, is this true? Is this true? To be able to walk through it. They talked about, trying to think through some of my notes here to be able to look at some of the things here that I can bring you up to speed on. There's a lot of conversation about the standard. How do we actually judge? What is the standard for a trial like this? Typically that's set at the very beginning. And so both sides, both the House managers and the White House had the opportunity to be able to argue what's the standard of evidence. And that may not be a big deal to some people on the outside, but when you're actually making a decision, there are standards like just a preponderance of evidence. That basically means 51% of the facts kind of lean one way, 49% the other way. So if you have 51%, you got to go with a preponderance of the evidence. You've got clear and convincing, which may be a little higher standard on that, but it's still basically a little more than a little less on it. And then you've got something called beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what's used in a criminal case. And since this is laid out like a criminal case is in the Constitution with treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors, the overwhelming majority of the conversation was really about circling around this beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a fairly high standard. It's the reason we've only had 8 people in the history of the country that have ever been removed for an impeachment, and no president has ever been moved for impeachment, because there's typically a pretty high standard on this. There's a Democratic member that she actually left a couple of years ago, very respected. Her name is Barbara Mikulski. She's from Maryland. She made a statement they brought back before saying, you should not remove a president based on a hunch, which I thought was a really good way for her to be able to put that, to say, if you're going to remove a president, there should be a really high standard of evidence. That was her argument even in 1999 with President Bill Clinton at that point, to say you can't have just a hunch on this. You've got to have really beyond a reasonable doubt, really clear evidence to be able to go through the process on it, be able to see what happens and why this is happening. There was some conversation as well, just dialoguing about how much of, if there's a percentage. There was this question that Susan Collins actually asked very early, that if you get mixed motives from someone, if you think they had a national security motive, but they also had a personal motive, what would that be like? And there was a lot of conversation about motives from an individual in a political sense. Professor Dershowitz came up and said, well, let me give you an example of this and how complicated this can get in a hurry. President Obama, when he was president, Congress authorized him to give lethal aid to Ukraine to be able to send these Javelin missiles that now President Trump has provided Javelin missiles there. President Obama was authorized to be able to do that, in fact, encouraged by Congress to be able to provide lethal aid. But President Obama did some poll testing, some opinions among some of the folks among some Democrats, and the polling for him came back and said, hey, there's some folks in your party that really won't like lethal aid going there, will think that's an escalation, so don't do it. And so the question that was raised then is, okay, that's a national security issue about helping Ukraine fight against the Russians. He had the authority to be able to do it, chose not to do it because of political polling and how that would work back home. How does that fit? What does that look like? And how do you do mixed motives there? Did President Obama have purely a political motive for that? Probably not. He probably also had a national security motive, trying to be able to make the right decision, but also clearly he was poll testing that as well to be able to determine, is that the right thing to do as well? So the challenge that came out was, on all these things, there's going to be some motivation to try to be able to figure out how to be able to manage that as you go through all of these different decisions, and how do you set a standard to make sure that's not only a clear standard, but it's a consistent standard for any president. Tons of different questions that went through today. As I mentioned, 93 different questions. If you have the opportunity, I'm sure a lot of them are clipped on YouTube at this point. We'll try to get additional information out to people as we go. Tomorrow we'll start again at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's noon Central Time in Center of the World, Oklahoma. So we will get started at that time. We will probably go another 10 hours, though it may be a little less. There's about 100 questions that are queued up right now, ready to go, including some that I have for tomorrow. But we'll see how many of those actually get in. Depends on how long some of the answers are and what happens. And there'll be some folks that'll drop out and say, all right, my question's already been answered, so I'm going to drop mine and be able to go from there. So we'll just have to be able to see. But as I mentioned at the very top of the time, I've gone through this now 8 days. I've gone through a lot of reading, a lot of background, a lot of information on this. I don't see anything that rises to the level of removal of office for the president of the United States. I also don't see a reason that we're going to have to take on additional witnesses. The House has been very clear. They feel like they have clear and compelling evidence. They want additional witnesses. And I'm having to balance out a very simple question. There are some things that you're pursuing to say, what are the facts of the case as we've been presented? What's a fact base and what's actually a political argument that's trying to stretch this out as long as they can? The House went as fast as they could last year in October, November, December. Then they stalled it out for 33 days before it came to the Senate. And now there seems to be a lot of requests. In fact, one of the questions that I had today was if we actually did the 11 requests that they have put out there for the 11 different either witnesses or document searches, how long would that take to be able to do what they've asked us to do? And the response was a very long time. There was no way to be able to guess it because even the document searches would take weeks to months to be able to go through that and would literally lock the Senate up for months. So it has the appearance of part of this is maybe a fact-based, part of it is a political base as well. And to be able to say there is a perspective that in an election year to stretch this out as long as you possibly can, there's a sense that we're going to make this trial stretch all the way through the election season. Since the Iowa caucuses are literally next week, New Hampshire's right after that, Super Tuesday's coming up in a little over a month. There's a lot of things that are rolling pretty quickly at this point that I think we need to be able to determine what are the facts that we have in front of us now and be able to make a decision based on those facts. We'll stay in contact. Feel free to be able to stay in contact with us. You can call, reach out to our office. You can go to the website, lankford.senate.gov. And then also you can go to our social media platforms at Senator Lankford. And of course, on those platforms, you can also see our contact numbers for any of our 3 offices in Oklahoma or in Washington, D.C. Look forward to getting a chance to be able to catch up with you again tomorrow and try to give you the details and some highlights of some of the questions. And what happens tomorrow is we continue to be able to work through this. Every day has its own interesting group of things that are occurring. Today was another long day, but a lot of facts and information came out today, and a lot of clarification, quite frankly, came out today to be able to understand what we have, what we don't have, and what's become very clear through this process.